Right, so it is 2024 now, and in 2023 I tried planting a tree for every day of the year, and I'm going around now checking on how they're doing and seeing where they're at. So we're doing section 5 now, if I've got that right, which is a relatively large section, but it's going to be relatively repetitive, so it should be relatively quick. So we're going to start with something that isn't the sort of general thing. So this is a bamboo here, which I planted this. So this is Bambusa vulgaris, which is one with an edible shoot. You can actually see a shoot coming up. This is a much smaller shoot than we will end up having in the longer run. So eventually these will be significantly thicker than my arm at their bases. And then yeah, there's a largish one which you might be able to see through all of this over there. That is, I think, 5-6 years older. So this should eventually catch up. It will need cutting back because we are in, as you might be able to tell, a crowded spot here. We've got 2 mango trees, and the idea is this should come up in between them, and it should, with pruning, be a light barrier between them to stop them spreading pests and diseases to each other. And yeah, it's really nice to see that a new shoot has come up from the base and is coming up pretty fast. It's still way behind adult, but by the end of the rains it might be putting out full-size ones. And then we have its partner, who went in I think on the same day. So this is in a slightly more exposed spot, and it did suffer a little bit more as a result during the rains, and you can see it hasn't yet followed suit in terms of putting out a new shoot, but it is alive, it's healthy, it's leafed up again pretty well since the rains arrived, so hopefully it won't be too long before it decides it's going to start adding a little bit of mass. It's already big enough to be conspicuous and hopefully won't be trampled, but yeah, we'll see.
Then we come out into the sort of long part, section 5, because it's quite...
Now because section 5 is quite open and relatively inaccessible, a lot of these are lines of trees that I thought would do well with limited care and should hopefully form a sound break and eventually a fire break, because trees tend to exclude grass, which is very flammable, between us and the road. So you can see that there's an area there which is sort of slated for a little bit more development at some point in the distant future. So my sister and I have various plans for that, but for now I wanted a sort of barrier between us and that I could plant. And so in here we've got one of our hardiest trees, which is Pachira glabra, and there are a lot of them here, so I'm just going to sort of skip by them. So this is the first. Somewhere in here we have another one, I'm sure of it. I checked it the other day. Here we go. Second, and you can see with a little bit more shelter, this one has some more growth. Somewhere. This one was given to me as Pachira aquatica. I'm not sure it is. That is a different species, but it's hard to tell when they're immature like this. But yeah, it's third. Got a break with a little Christmas berry. Oh, we've got a break with what I thought was a Christmas berry, but is actually a Hymenicardia now that it's producing fruit. So neither of those are edible, but they're both good biomass accumulators. They're relatively shrubby trees, don't tend to compete much. But yeah, they add a bit of interest and a bit of soil. And then here, in amongst some Philanthus, which is this stuff, we've got another, number 4, and somewhere in this ginger bush, number 5. So this is also a little bit tangled up in there, but it's got some new growth coming, so that's good. Number 6. The Dracaenas did better here than they did in a lot of areas, partially because this was relatively early planting, because I knew it wouldn't be easy to water. This one probably suffered the most, that leaned away, but it's still alive. But yeah, number 6 down here is fine. And we had a little self-seeded mango tree that got marked out, so that would be staying. And then somewhere in here yeah, this was our first fatality for the Pachira. I think our only fatality for the Pachira glabra, so the Savanut. So this got replaced with a Madagascan tree. This is Delanex regia, sometimes called the Royal Poncinia, but I've always known them as flamboyants. They get covered in fantastic red flowers just before the rains hit. They are really gorgeous trees. They're nitrogen fixers, but they can tend to acidify the soil if you have a lot of them together. I do want a little bit of variation in the soil, because you can see along here we have a row of fairly old mango trees who've dominated this area for a while. Just through there is section 4. But yeah, it's quite good to have variation here, but I wouldn't plant a whole row of these, although that is something we've done along the driveways. And then here we have, where do we have? Yeah, down in here we have another Savanut. We should have another one down in here. This is a higher density than I would usually plant the same thing. So every 3 I've tried to break it up, even where they haven't lost one. But yeah, this is another one coming along nicely. And again, they should be mixing things up a bit with these mangoes here. And then here we have another variation. So we went to Tamarindus indica, and this went completely leafless during the dry season, but you can see it's leafed up again nicely. It hasn't done much growing. At most there's a couple of centimeters of growth along here. But yeah, it's coming up, so that's alright. They're not fast growing when they first go in. They can pick up with a bit of time. And then somewhere in this sandals, this is a native tree that I rather like that tends to get brittle when it gets big. We've got another slightly more cheerful one. I think this is part of day 1's planting, so this is the very first day of last year's planting, and you can see it was a significantly larger one going in. It's quite succulent towards the base. It's coming up well. And then another one in here, also looking pretty good. Quite well leafed and quite good and solid. And that should be all the Sabanuts for this section, but that is not all for this section, so we'll carry on with the rest. So for the rest we go through in between this line of Gmelinas on my left and the much older mangoes on my right. The Gmelinas will be coppiced eventually. These are going to be timber trees or pole trees. These are an Indian tree. They're a really good biomass accumulator. They're just not great fruit. I mean, some birds will eat it, but mostly the birds are more interested in the flowers. They're really good fast growing ones for getting established, and they don't really need any water in our climate to settle in, so they're not bad. But yeah, we'll start with another of our Delanex. So it's a nitrogen fixer, which our soils are very weak generally, so a little bit of nitrogen fixing is good. There were 2 saplings went in together here because they've been growing next to each other, the place I transplanted them from. And they do actually both have signs of life, but the larger one only has them down here. The upper one had dropped all its leaves, but is regaining them now that it's wet again. So that's good to see. And here, down in here, before we get to that, down here we've got not only a baby chameleon, which is always lovely to see. I will never get over how tiny they are. Just, yeah, perfect little guy. But we're releasing him onto another Tamarindus indica. Again, it's not an Indian tree, it's an African tree. It's just trade links between Africa and Asia are old, and it's a useful tree, so it's growing pretty widely in both, but almost certainly started in more or less this part of Africa. Okay, then we're going on to some more lines. So our first line was of Brydelias and more Gmelinas. So again, this should be a good sound break and a good coppice. We've got road over there making a lot of noise, and so having these between that and the workshop should make it a little less sort of distracting in there. This one's coming up well. It did lose a couple of branches, but it's pretty good. Gmelinas tend to be. And then down here we had a Brydelia, but that completely vanished, so I planted this little Savanut in its place. So not all the Savanuts, I keep forgetting. Then we have another Gmelina. So again, coming up nicely. Generally speaking, they do. And here we had another Brydelia. It was still a twig last I checked. A leafless twig, unfortunately. I can't see exactly where it was, but there's no sign of any Brydelia leaves. There is one, so I'll show you what they look like. But yeah, so I planted a Dracaena to be the tree in its place, because I don't usually plant Dracaena fragrance as a tree, but it's a pretty good one. Good biomass accumulator, has some medicinal uses as well. We have another Gmelina coming along, lovely and green. These were leafless during the dry season. This is actually sending up a second stem, which if this one ends up straighter, I will cut off the original, just because once it's high enough, it's better to have a straight one for poles. We have another. This was a Brydelia that went missing. Can I see where this one is? Should be on this side. Yeah, we've got it on this side, but it's still firmly rooted. But it's still just a twig, so we'll see if anything comes of that. And we have another Gmelina. This one, the tip died, but we've got plenty of life coming from lower down. So that's all right then. And then down in here somewhere with the least survived aloe. Yep. So the aloe got quite damaged. It is coming back up. So this was the ground cover to keep it from drying out. We have our little Brydelia. So this is Brydelia micrantha. It's also called stinkwood. It's a native tree. It's a decent timber. It also gets quite interesting because it's one of relatively few trees that range this far south in Zambia that do buttress readily. So they get those fantastic sort of forest type roots to help them stabilize. It's also decent timber, although it's called stinkwood. It's quite favoured. And then we have the last Gmelina for this row, which is actually a replacement because the original died. So just around the beginning of the rains, no, a little way into the rains, I replaced it with another one who is settling in nicely. Let me go a little further. One I almost included in section 4. That through there is our long line of Pachira, and down here we have what I think is Ficus salicifolia, which would translate to willow leaf fig. It's usually called a wonderboom fig because the oldest, I think, certainly the largest tree in South Africa by mass is called the wonderboom, and that is a member of this species. It's obviously much older. This one was one that popped up in my pond, so I transferred it out because I didn't need a fig growing in my pond. But it's coming up. It's looking lively, if still relatively tiny. Okay, and then we're going to do 2 rows in one, I think. So on one side we've got a row of mixed trees, starting with this jacaranda, who is coming up nicely. On the other side we have more Gmelinas, so this one's doing well. Down in here we have Spathodia campanulata, which is the tulip tree, or Nandi flame, which is coming up nicely as well. And then over here we have another Gmelina, who is, again, coming up really well. You can see all this is new growth since the rain started. And down here we have Vespesia garciana. We had Vespesia garciana. She seems to have entirely disappeared. She did disappear once before and come back. So I called her Hope, but then she disappeared again. So I think that was pretty final. And this instead is a Sabanat to replace her, because Sabanats, I use them to replace a lot of things. And over here, got another Gmelina coming along nicely. And somewhere in here, yeah, in amongst these Mexican sunflowers who will need to be trimmed a bit, we've got another jacaranda. So this is another South American, Central and South American tree. Lovely purple flowers. Can be a bit an issue with there's too many together, but they pop up everywhere, so thought transfer them somewhere they could be useful. And it's a good timber, again, as well as a lovely flower. And then, yeah, we've got one, oh hang on, got another of our Gmelinas. This one's come up so much I almost missed it. So down here is where it started its growth. It's got a little bit more shade because it's got this syringa. This is another Indian tree. This is not actually syringa, but it's usually just called syringa. I think it's Melia something. It's quite invasive, but it's a decent timber, so I will probably prune these in a bit once the other trees are established, and then just coppice it, try and stop it from flowering. But yeah, we've got another jacaranda over here, which is our last jacaranda, and then we have another Gmelina, who is also doing absolutely fine. Again, benefiting a little bit from the shade. It's got a little bit more growth than the ones that are more exposed. Bigger leaves as well, softer leaves. And then Down here we did have Phoenix reclinata, but it got really toasted. They can come back from very little compared to most palms, but I don't know whether anything's going to be coming back from that still. Nah, it's holding on, so it might come back. So there's something below ground still, which is all you really need sometimes with Phoenix reclinata. The other Phoenix are all one stem and done, but reclinata can be pretty reliable sometimes. This year was not good for them, but this is the replacement for that in case it doesn't come back. So this is Portulacaria afra. This is a small shrubby tree native to eastern and southern Africa. Edible tips, these little red bits are new growth, and that's where you'd break it off, chuck it in salad. It's a bit astringent, but it's decent food, and yeah, it's coming up, so that's all right. That's our lines done, and the next sort of conspicuous part with this somewhat sunburnt dragon fruit vine climbing up it is another yucca. So we've got 3 of them here. This one had been pretty upright the whole way through. It did get sunburnt at the top, you can see there, but it's pushing out some new leaves in the cone in the center. So this is Yucca gigantea. They get huge. They're a forest yucca more than a lot of others are, so they'll do pretty well even as everything else comes up around them. We've got a second one there which is now standing the proudest, and a third one there which I really thought we'd lose. It went very weak for a while, but you can see it's nice and firm and solid and upright now, and yeah, so it's really perked up. And the dragon fruit on this one had even flowered at one point, but I don't think there was any chance of it fruiting. It was a very small piece, but yeah, they should all have dragon fruit climbing in them eventually. And in the middle of them we have one of our forest succulents. So those are all American, and this is Zambian. So this is Euphorbia ingens, a candelabra tree, which is a lovely giant succulent that tends to be found in more Munga than Miombo forest, although they are in the Miombo as well. And it's coming up. You can see some new leaves here, and a lot of this growth here is since the rains. They're not fast, they take a long while to get started. I've got one that's I think 5 years old and is really only up to my chest now, but it's coming, so it'll get there eventually. And let's do this bit next. This is a bit of a chaotic mix and match section. So here we have Morus albus. So this is a white mulberry, unlike one of the other ones I planted. This is the typical white mulberry, so that fruit is actually black when it's mature, just white when it first forms. But yeah, it's a little bit tough growth still. Some of this I think is post the rains. Here we go. So some of the growth down here is since the rains arrived, but most of this is pretty sun-hardened stuff that had been here before the rains hit, so it's presumably, hopefully, just getting its roots settled in. It's pretty firm in there, so that seems to be the case. And then here we have someone who will be leafless and look dead until the rains end, but hopefully isn't dead. So this is a winter thorn who was nice and leafy until the rains hit. So this is Viterbia albida. It's one of the native acacias, and classically when they're adult, they are leafless during the wet season and leaf up again once it dries out. And so they're really good for agriculture because they provide shade when it's needed most and not when it isn't. It has got a little bit of dieback here, which isn't great, but they're usually pretty hardy and can go down to almost nothing and then spring back up when they're ready to. So hopefully that's alright. And here we had one that did seem to be springing back and then wasn't. So this was a Moringa oleifera, but that went completely dry during the dry season, seemed to be dying back, and then it sprang back when the rains hit and then almost instantly rotted. So then we replaced it with a Sabinat, of course. Why not? And down through here, almost forgot it, we have someone who should eventually compete with these Moringas. So this is Cohitzapotl, or the Mexican apple, or white sapote. It's actually more closely related to the lemons than the typical sapotes. But yeah, it's coming up alright. You can see it's only went in quite recently, so it's only got about a centimetre, maybe an inch. Yeah, about an inch of new growth since the rains hit. It doesn't look as yellow in life as it does on the camera. It's pretty vigorous looking, quite healthy, quite happy with that. And then, yeah, one more in this section, I think. So then, through here, this is the much older Euphorbia ingens. So candelabra tree. This is not from this year. This is 2016. So it's 8 years old. But you can see it's coming up all right. This is where it was when the rains hit. So it's gained a decent bit of height, but you can see it took a while. Each of those constrictions is a year. So hopefully it's got some more to do before these rains end. We've got a few months before these rains theoretically end. And I was quite happy with the shade here. It's under some guava trees that sprang up by themselves. And over here we have the last tree for this year before we would get into section 6. So this is Mangifera indica, and we do have a whole bunch. This should be my favorite type, which is the sort of standard local yellow, which is a small, sour, stringy mango, which is, yeah, ideal for drying, ideal for eating out of hand, provided you don't mind using a toothpick afterwards. And it's coming up nicely. It can be a little bit finicky the first couple of rains, but this one has come up pretty well. It seems like it's got some more growth coming right there in the middle. And that should be everything for section 5. If I missed anything, there'll be a little clip cut in somewhere, which isn't entirely possible, but this is a fairly open, straightforward section, so it shouldn't have done. Section 6 is much more close together. It's much more of a sort of thickety approach and much less straight lines, but might take longer because it's a lot more complicated. But we'll see.